Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. I'm so glad you're with us. Decoders, today we're going to crack open gender. It's a new year, 2025. It's already started off with a bang for most of us. And we've had a few requests to just crack open and look at gender. Obviously, it doesn't impact the avatars. We can be any avatar in our genders, but there's some beautiful and unique nuances and differences to the different genders, and let's have some fun looking at that. Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. Welcome to Humans Decoded, a story of hobbits, fairies, elves, dwarfs, gnomes, and humans. If you get lost at any point, there is a deep dive on all the different avatars in episode 1. It includes notes. Thank you for joining us in a fun little chat about the vast potential of our human makeup. Hi, Cam. Hi, Leela.
Hi, everybody. Hello, world.
Hi, Kiran. Hi, Cam. Hi, Decoders. I love sitting with you all. It feels very warm and cozy back in the cold of Switzerland. So I'm double happy to be here today.
You've left the California sunshine, but not the sunshine of our heart. And just FYI, if you're new to the program, the Facebook group, I know how boomer of us, but there you go. The Facebook group is very alive. It's juicy. There's photos of our Christmas holiday. There's lots of questions. Newcomers are always welcomed in. So definitely check it out. There's really fun stuff there. And that's where we definitely feel the love.
So let's head into today's topic. I am excited.
I am so excited about getting into gender. I've been on Kiran for ages, like, let's do an episode on gender, just because I love her perspective on it so much. And I know personally for me, it's helped me a lot in terms of how I communicate with my fellow men or how I sit inside of myself as a woman. I work in a predominantly male-led industry. The camera world has lots of men in it, mostly. And so for ages, I tried to be a boy as much as possible at work. And then I discovered RuPaul's Drag Race, and I was like, what is it to be a woman? And then suddenly celebrating my femininity was like the most fun. Sometimes I notice I coast on it, so I'll like be damsel in distress and be like, I can't do it, I'm a girl.
I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl.
I'm just a girl. And then realizing like, oh wait, actually is that true for me? Like, I'm actually a very capable woman. I can, own that. So yeah, I just feel like there's so much to explore. So I'm pumped for this episode.
I'm pumped for this episode because there's so many taboos. You're not allowed to point out differences in gender. There's like one politic that's like, we're all one people, man. And also like there's so many taboos. Like if men display any effeminate behavior, it's like, you cannot talk about that. Like it's so offensive. It's so wrong. So I love to blow up taboos. I mean, taboos are my raison d'etre. They're the reason I live. Pop those taboos so that we can have freedom.
Just a little asterisk on that word, effeminacy. I just Googled it right before we hit record and saw that there's a little warning to this word, that it is derogatory. And the warning was about, let me read it out loud so I get it right. It was saying that it's with a reference to a man having characteristics and ways of behaving traditionally associated with women and regarded as inappropriate for a man. So there we have it.
2025 Google warns us not to ever describe masculine gender as having any female characteristics associated with it.
Just the word effeminate.
That's how taboo.
Yes.
Yeah, and that definition's from the Oxford Dictionary. So it's like literally already baked in that it's, wrong.
And
The word itself, wrong.
And it's funny to me, this thing that, I don't know, that a man wouldn't have feminine qualities. Like for me, it's so clear that every being has both energies to like in different ratios, but most people do have both energies, masculine and feminine. So I'm like, I don't know what you're all talking about, that's not okay. I don't get it once again. But even though one might say I'm a bit clueless or it doesn't matter because it's, everybody has both energies, there are areas, there are fields where it does matter a lot, right, Kiran?
Yeah. I feel like it's really important to recognize we have different genders. And so we, when we're talking about gender, we're talking about the brain and not the body. So to be clear, when we develop in the womb, our brains and bodies develop at different paces, and sometimes they don't sync up. So if we can have a male brain in a female body, or vice versa, a female brain in a male body. So we're not referencing gender off of body, we're referencing it off the brain. And gender is a spectrum. I talk about that. But what we're talking about here is like the male brain and the female brain develop differently. And when we're talking about development, we're talking about like hormone receptors and we're talking about pathways. And so if we talk about a little baby boy and a little baby girl, the little baby girl has more dopamine and serotonin dribbling in. There's also huge amounts of other hormones going on too that are different, but let's just talk about those two main ones because those are feel-good hormones. You're doped, the dopamine. And so the little girl has got a lot more of that. So as a result, the little girl can calm easier and she can receive information easier versus the little boy who has much less of that doping going on. And as a result, he's very restless. He's very agitated. He's like a little girl, and parents know this, they can sit quietly while you tie their shoes. But when you tie a little baby boy's shoes, he will crawl all over you, crawl away. He'll hit you with a hammer. He's going to bang, and even if you're speaking to these two children, you can actually speak in quite quiet tones to the girl because she's well doped. Like she has a very calmed system where the male child, you literally have to speak in higher decimals. You have to use less words to get through from that restlessness, which is not problematic. It's just developmental differences. But it is really, really impactful when we're talking about, a few arenas. Like for one is like the learning arena. So, this little baby boy and this little baby girl, they're going to keep developing differently. And so you might, by the time you have two toddlers, the girl toddler is much more capable of interrelationships. So she can actually share toys more easily. She can actually begin to pick up on subtle language skills through the body and is reading emotional. Where the little boy, he's still like, it's still like hammer, hit, bang, 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 because of the hormone development. And what we're actually talking about is there's a different brain stem. And so the female brain stem is very thin. And as a result, information crosses between the two hemispheres very quickly. And in the little boy, it's thicker. It's harder to get across the wall. But it's building very unique skill sets. But we don't recognize that. And where it really comes to play and we really start to see a big difference is when they're both in school and we start to teach children to read. We begin in kindergarten, grade 1 and 2. So 5, 6, 7 are the years that we're teaching children to read. And now for a female brain, that's very appropriate developmentally. But for a male brain, it is not yet appropriate. He's only beginning to be available at about age 7. So for a boy, it'd be 7, 8, 9. To learn to read, but that's not what's happening. And so as a result, the success rate for little boys to learn to read is very low. And that starts to imprint behaviors. And that starts to imprint, like I'm terrible at reading. Reading sucks. I hate to learn. I'm stupid. This is really heavy for male children because it's developmentally inappropriate for them to learn to read at that age. And then so it keeps growing and growing and growing. And by the time you're at like a 16-year-old girl and a 16-year-old boy, that 16-year-old girl has logged at that point like 100,000 language hours. She's been reading a lot, so her syntax and her literacy, of course, is much more. And also her ability to read and feel emotional states inside of language. It's very nuanced. It's very sophisticated versus the boy who's logged like 100 hours to her 100,000. But it flips the other way of like that boy brain, again, the brain, not the body. That boy brain has logged 100,000 motor skills. With that stick and that hit, it grew, and he climbs trees and he jumps over puddles. And again, I'm talking about a brain, so it could be in a female body. And so they have this huge motor skill vocabulary and language, which is an embodied one, right? So they've got 100,000 on the girls' 100, right? So we're talking about like huge differences. And so learning is a zone where it'd be really great to identify the different genders.
And here's where I want to ask, like the differences in these brains, that's not gonna, I don't know, they're always going to be there. Like the brains are never going to sync up in a way to like, I don't know, sort of the same
like
plateau place, whatever.
They're all catched up. They're not going to do that. You're absolutely right. Because by the time we're starting in preteen years, so 9, 10, 11, on both the male and female, we have environmental factors and emotional factors that begin to shift hormone levels and developmental levels also. So this is like traumas and heartbreaks and, misunderstandings and karmic belief systems like I'm dumb, I'm stupid, that start to actually decrease amounts of, various hormone receptors as we grow. So the older people get, like those 250-year-olds, now their hormone imprints and their learning abilities are actually quite unique and begin to be, very specifically aligned to the various challenges and or resiliences that they had in their life. And so we might think like, if we go back to those two 16-year-olds, life becomes very chaotic through those teen years. And for a lot of us, especially in the first world, much of the chaos begins then, especially the way our brain is developing. There's a whole new development of brain that begins in the teenage years. And so chaos ensues. And so we might think, well, a brain that's got this beautiful hormone drip that's really richly dripping with hormone, like with the serotonins and the dopamines and all the other ones, it's going to handle the swings and the crises better, and going to be a more resilient being. And actually, data shows us the opposite, that those that are quite challenged with the various hormone receptors have to build some external tools. They have to build support systems and as a result, grow a pair.
That's all of us.
They have to grow up. Yes, like the three of us here, meditation and tools for sanity. That we actually find that people who are not so successful at cascading hormones through their system can have more success rate at building resiliences to that by bringing in those external tools. Now, of course, if you're not going to bring in the external tool set, it's not going to work. But the point is that like none of us are preset in our hormonal success, our ability to calm, our ability to dope ourselves, our ability to be resilient in chaos, et cetera, et cetera. We can support that in our own brain health. But when we're talking about learning, we need to recognize the difference. The next place is sexuality. And again, it's a hormone story. It's a body story. It's a brain story. And male sexuality and female sexuality are apples and oranges. They are entirely different fruits. They have entirely different growing regions and entirely different needs.
I just want to share
different planets.
Just a tiny little anecdote from when I was 13 years old. Sex was not on my plate. Like, I wasn't thinking about that. It wasn't on my radar for a couple more years. And I remember the boys in my class talking about this porn star, and they were talking about porn all the time. And I was like, it was like they were living on a different planet. Like, as you were saying, apples and oranges, like so different.
I also remember, Kiran, you gave me this really beautiful illustration of the apples and oranges. It's actually more like a panther and a cat, and then putting them in the same arena. Like the sexuality of a male would be represented by a panther in that it's just like raw and so much more developed. And then female sexuality is more like a cat. And so there's kind of implications of those two things being in the same space. Like they're not actually equal.
Yeah, and that's what we really see with our 16-year-olds. The 16-year-old brain and the male-female brains, we're putting them in the same cage or in the same arena. And we end up with both losing. It's often very, very traumatic on both sides of that scene because it's so different. So it would behoove us as a culture and a society to recognize the differences very concretely in sexuality between the two genders. And then thirdly, in language, the way that females' language is so different than the way that males' language things. And again, we're talking about a different brain. We're talking about different brain, like how the brain is processing language. And we see in the female, again, they have all this syntax, all this nuance, all this, language. It's very open-handed. It tends to be very like question-based. It's quite a sophisticated system of language nuance. And we see that with boys, it's much more simple. It's much more direct. And one isn't superior to the other. Just because one is more sophisticated doesn't mean it's better. What they are is different. And so recognizing that the way men speak is so very different than the way women speak would clear up a whole bunch of relationship issues.
I think that's so important to point out that one isn't better than the other. Because, like, for a moment in my life, I was very much into recover the feminine, like reclaim the femininity, and both inside of myself, because that aspect of me has been quite depleted for a long time. And in that moment, I think I saw feminine as a little bit better than masculine. Like, I saw all the masculine qualities as sort of, I don't know, that pushy, depleting, it's hard, it hurts. And so it's really important to point that out. No, one's not better than the other. And it's kind of the conclusion I came to now that, like, who cares? Recover the feminine or not? Like, I'm not so concerned about that anymore. I don't need to call my yoga classes, my restorative yoga, all that. I don't have to call it recover the feminine, because I remember men asking me, like, so does that mean I cannot come? Like, no, that's not what I mean, actually.
Well, and I think what's really also interesting is so add into this, right, that gender's the spectrum, right? So at one end of the spectrum, we have that real sort of masculine archetype. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have the real feminine archetype. But along the spectrum is that beautiful mix of both. And so that the more, like some of us sit on that real hard masculine or real hard feminine end of the spectrum. But when we're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, it means it's mixing in. So it may mean that, if you were right in the middle, half and half, then you're going to have more language processing. You're going to have more emotional intelligence to your language. You're going to have a sexuality that's a little more feline and not just panther, right? Like in the spectrum where we are, it's so awesome. We all have a good mix of both masculine and feminine in us. And that's fun to look at.
Yeah, and we've actually put together an illustration for you, which will go up on the Humans Decoded Facebook page, but I'll describe it to you. And yeah, just as Kiran said, we've got this beautiful spectrum. And on one end, you have the very, very masculine. And on the other end, you have the very, very feminine. So we've put together a whole range of celebrities that kind of illustrate one end and everything in between. So on the uber masculine end, we've got Al Pacino, just like a man's man. And then on the other end, we've got Reese Witherspoon, a girl's girl. So if we start with the masculine end of the spectrum, we've got Al Pacino, and then just a tiny bit more kind of softer, sort of feminine energy, but still very much like a man's man, is someone like Brad Pitt. And then after that, you start mixing in just a little bit of sprinkle of more feminine energy, and you've got someone like Owen Wilson. So still very much man, but you can see there's like kind of softer tendencies. And then after that, you've got Hugh Grant, who you could describe as effeminate, but he's still very much a man. Still like very much a romantic interest in all the rom-coms. But there is, a lot of feminine qualities. And then you go to the middle and it's just pretty much like 50-50 feminine and masculine energy. And it would be someone like Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye, or Tig Notaro, the comedian. So she's a woman, but just there's like 50% masculine energy in there. So it's very like, sort of equal mix of both. And then we start swinging into the more feminine spectrum. And you've got someone like Tilda Swinton, who's the woman, but sort of has like an androgynous energy. And then Uma Thurman, who's still, female, plays a lot of like love interest characters, but there's still kind of like a masculinity about her. And then Drew Barrymore, who's very feminine, but you can kind of tell she's also like a little bit tomboyish. And then Reese Witherspoon, just purely square set in feminine. And also we had a lot of fun kind of ever since we sort of designed the spectrum. I'm like, where do they sit? And so I would identify with someone like Drew Barrymore. So like quite girly, but still sort of playful and a little bit tomboyish.
I'm quite feminine. I'm actually very, very, very feminine. A lot of people can see, like, because I have a lot of clarity and a lot of freedom from like worry or anxiety. People read that as powerful, and sometimes people read power as masculine. So I think there's a projection that I might be sort of more like an Uma Thurman or something, but I'm actually I'm pretty girly. I'm pretty female.
Funny. When we first spoke about it, it was like, oh yeah, all of us in the Uma Thurman thing. But now it's like, no. You two are more Drew Barrymores, or maybe even more towards Reese. Whereas I see myself definitely sitting with Uma Thurman, maybe even leaning a bit more towards Tilda Swinton. Like quite androgynous. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong. No.
I think it's beautiful to just discover. Like, that's the whole thing. And we talk about this all the time with authenticity.
Yeah.
Like to just discover.
Just
you don't have to land. You don't have to know.
Yeah.
You get to just explore. And at some point, the clarity dawns, but there's no urgency for that. And we just can play.
Yeah, I like that. Playful exploration for sure. And then when we came up with this, like the celebrities on the spectrum, and then we thought about like, what would it look like if Reese Witherspoon would sit down with Al Pacino and have a conversation? I think it would be quite awful for both of them. Or a little confusing, hard, I don't know. Because Reese would use a lot of words. Like, think Kiran was saying she's such a girl's girl. Like, Kiran uses so many words. And Reese would use so many words, and she would be quite passive with these words. She would ask lots of questions like, I don't know, are you comfortable here? Would you like to sit somewhere else? Are you warm enough? Would you like to drink this? Do you need dessert? Do you need food? Blah, 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 all that. And then on the other end, Al Pacino wouldn't use many words. He would use maybe a one-word sentence. His words would be quite active and sort of action-based, or there's a directness to it. And so I can imagine that to Reese, the sort of one-word sentences from Al would feel like an offense, would feel like, why are you barking at me? I sometimes have that experience with a man I spend I spend some time with and sometimes live with. I'm like, why are you shouting at me? And I think that's just how he talks. And on the other end, for Al, all these words coming from Reese, all these questions would feel like a bombardment, right? Like, oh my God, what does she want from me? So communication on sort of the opposite end of the spectrum is pretty challenging, or there needs to be lots of skills to make that a success.
Absolutely. And imagine if you've got a very feminine woman speaking, like, do you feel okay? Like, are you comfortable? Do you want some water? And it's speaking to a male toddler, and that's really what we have. We have a lot of primary females raising their children. Like, that's the primary parent, is the women. So it's really cool if those women can understand gender and that spectrum, and the spectrum, helping children identify their own place in the spectrum.
And you've been saying it's not one single point. It is this beautiful rainbow, and okay, there's lots more freedom to play in that than we, like, previous generations thought.
Yeah, I'm really noticing that in my workplace, in the camera world. There's just a lot more men that I think feel more freedom to express themselves. So, they're running around sort of carrying heavy equipment, but they're wearing nail polish or maybe a little bit of makeup. And yeah, I think that's really cool with all the millennials and the Gen Zs that seem to have a lot more freedom to display feminine qualities. Also, equally, the women on set, a lot more comfortable to display masculine qualities, or, sort of play around with their pronouns.
I think that's what's so wonderful, is that there's less masculine policing effeminacy from men. Because that's such a toxic element that happens inside of male culture, that if men display any level of effeminacy, the other men just freaking pounce, just eat them alive, right? And that was a really toxic element of parenting also, which could happen on either end. Parents policing their children to either be super feminine or super masculine and not display the other characteristics. And we're seeing so much less of that. And that's such a win. It's so much more freedom. And that was the thing, I think, especially like the boomers and the Gen Xers were very unaware of the gender spectrum at all. But the millennials and the Gen Zs, like you're talking about, there's just, because of that fluidity, we're seeing so many different things. Like, millennials are the first generation of people on our planet to be core parents, to be primary caregivers to their children. It's never happened before on our planet as a generation. I mean, individuals maybe, but not as a generation. And having those men be such present primary parents is a game changer for the children. Game changer. And Gen Zs too, we're seeing them. Obviously, they're still quite young, but some of them have begun to be parents, and we see them from the get-go being very active in the choice to be parents, very active in the parenting role, very active in all the choices for their children's lives. It's a game changer.
And what I've noticed from my vast field research from dating mostly younger men is that some of them do feel pressurized to partake in being very fluid and wearing the nail polish, even though they don't, that's not them. They're not that fluid. They are a dude. They're just a dude. And and for some of them it feels like if I don't behave that way, if I don't present that way, I'm not going to be part of my peer group. I'm going to be kicked out of my gang, of my tribe. I'm not going to be loved, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think we see that specifically with the Gen Z. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure to change pronouns and to be part of the they pronoun, even though that may not be where on the spectrum their gender is. And so there is going to always be a backlash every time we revolutionize and open up to more freedom. There will be these backlashes, but so be it. Because the differences are okay. We don't need to try to be one thing. We have so many freedoms, technology and abundance and less violence in the world than we've ever seen before. As we evolve as a people, there's more room for freedom. We're not in the survival mode. We can start to be in thrive mode. And in thrive mode, freedom wins. And it always has been. It's the highest value for humans. And so not trying to be one point on the gender spectrum is already a lot of freedom.
I feel like this is just such essential information because everybody we know, like, there's no way you can get away from gender. It's just always going to be in our lives. And so to hear, the challenges that a baby or toddler boy might have versus a girl, it's just an opportunity for more compassion, when you're raising your kids, and whether that's as an auntie or a babysitter or a mom or a parent, just to kind of acknowledge these differences seems pretty cool. And I know in myself, just the way I relate to men or women, but just knowing like if they're sitting on the Al Pacino spectrum, like I'll edit my text. So instead of, maybe perhaps could possibly please, I'll just be like, all right, what's the action inside of all this mess of words? And just be like, get me some milk. So yeah, I think it's so cool to talk about it. And similar to how it is with avatars, really we're just celebrating the diversity and letting you know that wherever you sit is okay.
Amen. And I've heard we've got some fun catch up this week. Ever since I turned back to Switzerland, things have changed at this date in California.
Yeah, so I'm still at the villa in California with Kiran and a few more hobbits. And since Leela left, the elf to hobbit ratio sort of changed drastically. And so it's really shown in our dinner prep. So before there used to be 2 elves, Leela and Kiran, and dinner was no thing at all. Like in 40 minutes, we'd have these amazing meals on the table. But as soon as Leela left, somehow the whole thing fell apart. So for the first couple of dinners, we just had takeaway. And then we ventured to cook, and it took like 3.5 hours. 2 nights in a row, we were like, guys, what the hell? And then we all find that if we don't eat by 7, everybody just crashes. So by 8, we're kind of not making sense anymore and bumping into each other. And so we had to have a little recoup and be like, okay, what's changed? Leela's not here. We don't have the elf who's going to strategize and like just be able to just cook in a flash. What we've got are an abundance of hobbits and a fairy who's just there for vibes. And so what we've had to do is start prepping dinner at 4 p.m. In the hopes of getting it on the table at 6:30. And last night it was actually really successful. It just meant that we could take our time and there was room for sort of detours. And we had dinner on the table by 6:30. It was great.
We had
But
to
yeah, efficiency
restructure everything. We had to restructure
exactly.
the day.
Efficiency went out the window.
We had to restructure like nap time at the house. We had to restructure shopping because also the shopping became a 2.5 hour journey
it's so
instead of like a 1 hour pickup. So but all you had to do was restructure the timetable and then everything's wonderful. And I will say that there's a lot more veggies and carbs on the table than when the elves were cooking. One of the things that was happening with the elves cooking is people were like, oh, too much protein, oh, too much fat. And now there's always like a salad and a whole dish of cooked vegetables and 2 different carbs, a whole thing of beans and a whole thing of rice, or a whole thing. Like there's so much more carb and veggie on the table.
More like what one would think of as a balanced meal, as opposed to what, Kiran and I would come up with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We do butter chicken. There's no butter chicken and rice.
Yeah. What do you mean you want salad?
And a side salad. Yeah, exactly, which we wouldn't eat.
Anyway.
So anyways, it is quite fun. And I would say that the Hobbits, though, because they're so good-natured and they're so sweet, they really enjoy coming together. And the fairy puts the music on and gets the drinks and makes the cocktails. And they get to take 2.5 hours to just touch every piece of fruit and smell it and slowly cut things up and wash everything and change utilities. And they like to clean and potter while they're doing it. And the kitchen's never been cleaner. When the elves were cooking, there was like handprints all over the fridge. And because the elves will come in at a different time and just clean everything in a total joy. And Leela mentioned that in her last episode. But the hobbits will potter and do it at the same time. And so we have an entirely renovated napkin cupboard and soon the pantry. So they do a lot in those 2.5 hours, not just make the dinner. But anyways, life has changed now that the elf to hobbit ratio is different.
Beautiful. I love to hear all these stories.
Y'all, we're going to be here with you next week. So thanks for listening and all our love. Mwah.
Mwah.
Thank you for listening. We obviously love hearing what you think. Your feedback helps us make a better show for you to listen to. So feel free to comment, and you can do it at Facebook, which is the Humans Decoded podcast. And if you're not on social, you can always email any questions to us at outreach@kirantrace.com. And thanks for listening. We love you.